Okay, so we're going to talk about deregulation today. Disregard the environmental policy. All right, not actually environmental policy. First, and hopefully I don't need to define this, we talked about what government regulation of business was yesterday, so we know that regulation is rules that are imposed upon whatever, right? Whether it's the marketplace or individual businesses or whatever. So deregulation then would be cutting back on rules, or eliminating rules or whatever. The first thing that I want to make sure that you understand is that deregulation, although sometimes solely attributed to Republicans, is not necessarily just a Republican ideology. Alright, deregulation is not always partisan in the way that it plays out. There are times where it is definitively partisan, so do not take that statement to mean that it is never partisan. Sometimes it is. However, other times it is not. So do not think that it is always just Republicans get rid of rules and let businesses just crap all over the little guy. Alright. A couple of different industries that we'll go over. So airlines were deregulated. I know. Why not? Thank you. Where was it? So airlines were deregulated. Okay, we used to have actually fairly strict regulations in terms of airlines because we sort of did the same thing that we did with railroads in the late 19th century, right? Because it's public transportation and it's travel and it's really important, right? What is going to happen is we'll get rid of some of that, which allows airlines to basically become more competitive. They can set whatever rates or fares or whatever that they want. Right? It causes some airlines to go bankrupt, mergers, things like that, which would increase the competition. Ultimately, the real sort of detrimental aspect to it is that a lot of smaller places, it became really difficult to get flights into those places. All right? It's just not cost effective. Does that make sense? So when you allow the businesses to determine it for themselves, right, businesses are not going to continue, they're not going to continue flight service to Somersville, West Virginia, right, where I come from. Not that there's even a real airport there, right? But even then, like you don't get a lot of flights that go into places like Charleston, West Virginia even, right? Not a very large airport there. And so it makes travel for some people increasingly difficult. Oh well, sorry, that's just sort of the nature of business, right? If you want something that is incredibly rare, you're going to end up paying more for it and you're going to have problems getting it, right? Anybody in here want to fly in Charleston, West Virginia? Yeah, no, don't do it. It's not fun, right? There's no point to it either, right? But if I want to go visit my family back in West Virginia, I have to fly in. I can't even fly into the state of West Virginia. There's no real airports in the state because it's not cost effective, right? In which case, most airlines are not going to do it. I'm going to tell you right now, guys, you will probably see this happen with mail service in your lifetime. I wholeheartedly believe that. Okay? In large part because how many of you actually get things in the mail that you care about? What?
Letters from my crazy aunt.
She can't email you? She's probably legitimately crazy then.
What stuff from mail? Packages.
What? No. Packages would be different. And I'm talking about like letters. I'm talking about because a lot of the times packages come from like UPS or FedEx. Those are private companies.
Birthday gifts.
Birthday
invitation.
You can't get an e-card.
Letter.
No.
Hey, guys, look. Y'all are ridiculous. I'm just going to be honest with you. That's absurd. Alright, you want to feel good about yourself because Granny remembered your birthday and she's not senile yet? She can send you an e-card. Okay? You want your little birthday cash in there? She can send you a Visa, like, gift card. which is the same as cash.
That's common when somebody got AIDS.
Well, no, that's the thing. I don't think it's going to happen tomorrow because you're absolutely right. Your grandmother, my grandmother, does not know how to. In fact, my grandmother doesn't have internet. Okay? So, like, my grandmother does not have internet. I'm not saying that's going to happen today. That's why I said it'll happen in your lifetime. Because I wholeheartedly believe that when you are the old people and you have grandchildren, you're not going to send actual birthday cards. Okay? You will send some sort of e-card and some sort of electronic gift certificate or gift card or whatever. Right? What's going to happen is that becomes increasingly sort of predominant in society. You will find that the United States Postal Service is probably going to have to be deregulated. Postal Service might become privatized. And then you're going to have individual companies that are basically bidding over it. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you right now, do you think that individual I'll give you a real town in West Virginia. Poe. Poe, West Virginia. Okay? P-O. Poe. Right? Do you think, do you, and I'm going to tell you right now, you will not find Poe on a map. But it is a real place in West Virginia. Okay? Do you think that the Postal Service is going to deliver to Poe, West Virginia? No. Alright? So you will see something sort of similar or in the future. But this sort of happened with airlines a long time ago. Alright? Now, once you deregulate in other aspects, there are also some concerns. There's going to be concerns generally that you're going to also decrease sort of quality as well, because there's not that much oversight now occurring from the government. Alright? Here's the thing. You get what you pay for. Right? So, if you're thoroughly concerned, you can sit there and do the research on your own and figure out, what airline has the best safety rating, or, like I'm going to assume most of you would do, you can just find the cheapest ticket that you can and pray that you're not that 1 out of 100,000 that has some sort of mechanical problem. Right? And then you pray that said mechanical, if you are that 1 out of 100,000 that has a mechanical problem, you pray that they caught it while you're still on the ground and not in midair. Right? Oh well. Okay, telecommunications is another one. I think we talked about this the other day about AT&T actually being broken up as a monopoly by the United States government in the 80s. Alright? Telecommunications is something that we have decreased regulations on for a variety of reasons, but we want to afford people more opportunity, more choice in what they want. You're seeing this actually increase even more drastically in this day and age in terms of cable. And I personally believe that what you will eventually see is you will see cable companies that begin to essentially offer you the opportunity to pay by channel. Right? Now you think that you have that already because there's different packages that you can get. But when I say pay by channel, I mean do you want the big four? Yes. Okay, you get Fox, CBS, ABC, NBC. There's one little grouping. Right? Do you like sports? Yes. Okay, you can get NFL Network, MLB Network, NHL Network, ESPN, ESPN2, and a couple of others thrown in. Right? Now, do you want the premium sports package? Because that's what it's going to take to get the Golf Channel and things like that. Okay? But you're going to afford yourself an opportunity to be able to sort of cherry pick which channels you do or do not want. Right? Because how many of you in this room watch the History Channel?
Yeah, it makes me.
Why?
Because there's some documentaries.
There's not history on the History Channel anymore, actually. It's terrible. Right? Now you get Pawn Stars. That's crap. Right? It used to be a good channel. It is no longer a good channel.
Vikings though. Vikings Steelers.
Okay? But this is...
Like what? He said ancient aliens. And I said Vikings.
Okay, the one really weird, crazy guy is kind of entertaining. I'll give you that. The point here is what you're doing is through deregulation, you're really affording the individual consumer a lot more sort of input or influence over the process. So as we deregulate, right, the market is going to be able to regulate itself more efficiently, and so you're going to see better pricing, some better efficiency, better resources, right? We have more competition. Competition is actually encouraged through deregulation. One of the significant aspects of regulation is that it generally creates barriers to entry. You learned that term in economics? I don't know what y'all learned in economics.
I have an epic battle with
Aggregate demand, aggregate supply.
charts.
Lots of charts and graphs.
You think an entire AP is the entire AP test just a bunch of graphs?
I'm sure
For y'all's sake, I certainly hope it is. That's all I'm going to say. I have no idea. Never looked at AP Econ whatsoever, so I have no clue. Okay. If you had taken my economics class years ago when I actually taught econ, you would have learned what barriers to entry are. But basically, it just means that there are stipulations that make it more difficult for new companies to start up. And regulation is one of the things that creates, or is one of those barriers to entry. So as you begin to deregulate, you afford an opportunity for startups to enter into the same market. Those startups generally are startups as a result of technological innovation or new business practices, more efficient business practices that ultimately make that marketplace itself more efficient, more cost effective for the consumer, etc. Right? These are all things that are created by deregulation. Right? Basically, if you want to see the negatives of deregulation, go back and look at the positives of regulation. Make sense? Don't need to be redundant and go over that again, do I? Wonderful. Subsidies. All right. First, subsidies are basically free money from the government. All right. So a subsidy is a government payment, and subsidies are used in order to try to manipulate, I don't know if that's the best word, but maybe influence is a better word, influence the actions or the behaviors of an individual. Alright? So, what we're trying to do through subsidies, right, is create some sort of positive net result. Right? So, and this is 100% true. You might look at me and tell me that I'm wrong on some of this. Right? But if you get like just straight cash for temporary assistance in needy families, right? Is that producing some sort of positive outcome? From a governmental standpoint, the answer is yes. Zane is probably going to want to argue that point. But it is yes.
As long as it's temporary.
Well, even when it's not so temporary, the government's going to argue that there is a net positive out of it, and the net positive being that people don't live in poverty. Alright? Not necessarily the best example. Okay? These are really the best example here, right? Because there are all sorts of subsidies that you can get that are really tax credits. And these are things that are meant to dictate or influence the behavior of American citizens. So for instance, you have a child, you get a tax credit, right? It's like $1,800. Alright, it's just a free $1,800 you get to write off on your taxes. And, which is comical because children cost way more than $1,800 a year. Good afternoon, Baker. Good morning, Baker. Who? Yes, he did show up today. Sure, why not? Anson. People have been looking for you forever, dude. Go to the student service window. Where's that? Yeah, so tax incentives, right? So we incentivize having children. Okay, that's something that goes back to like the post-World War II era. Alright, because after World War II we needed to repopulate the planet, right? And we wanted people to have children, so we gave them tax breaks for having said children, right? Do we still need to repopulate the planet today? Why not? Do we still give tax incentives? Are there still incentives for having children? Oh, there are. We'll talk about that in a little bit, why that's still the case. Right? Other things you can deduct, like you get tax incentives for deducting interest on your home mortgage or interest on your student loan debt. Right? Again, both behaviors that the government is sort of promoting. The government actually wants you to go out and buy a house when you get older because that helps stimulate the economy. All right? Additionally, the government wants you to go to college because apparently the government thinks everybody should go to college, which, I'll be honest with you, I personally don't understand. All right? Because somebody has to dig ditches in life or dig graves or whatever. And I don't need that individual to have a college education. I just don't. All right? But those are things that we give to people, right? Credit subsidies, these are things that people can sort of achieve, right? So VA home loans are a good example, right? If you go and join the military, you're going to be able to buy a house later on in life with 0 down, right? Which used to be a big deal. You can actually buy a house today with 0 down. You just pay something called primary mortgage insurance, right? But if you're a veteran, you don't have to pay that. Okay. And then benefits in kind. So these are subsidies that are non-cash benefits, right? Whether it's food stamps, Medicare, Medicaid, things of that nature. All right. So these are the various types of subsidies. Again, the purpose of it here is to encourage some sort of action within the private sector, right? So whether it's have children or buy a house or, you know, take care of yourself physically in terms of Medicare, Medicaid, whatever it is, right? There's some sort of behavior for the private American that the government deems to be an appropriate behavior, all right? And this shouldn't strike you as odd. Government really doesn't have a whole lot of tools to try to like manipulate what we do as people, all right? But tax breaks or incentives or subsidies, that's one of the few things that they really can do to try to push us in the general direction that they want us to go, right? So again, good example would be home ownership and your mortgage interest being tax deductible, right? It's actually even a little bit more in-depth than that anymore in this day and age. I don't know if you guys are aware, but we had a fairly serious housing crisis in 2006 in this country. Do we know about that? Right? One of the remedies for the housing crisis when Obama became president was to offer massive, just absolutely massive rebates for first-time home buyers, right? Trying to convince people who have never bought a home before that they should do that, because that would then increase sort of demand, which would drive prices back up at least slightly. Because there were homes that lost 50% of their value, right? I think we talked about this at one point in time. I had a brother who bought like a $600,000 house in California that when he was forced to sell it years later, sold for like $310,000. Right? Now on the bright side, he didn't lose any money. The bank lost money, but it still hurt him. Right? So moving on, when we look at sort of the politics about this, right? Like Zane, are subsidies good? Right. So
it's not an easy question.
It's not an easy question to answer, right? But if we look back to what we've been talking about over the last couple of days, right? Do we understand that subsidies are a part of this concept of spending? We understand that a lot of our subsidies are actually entitlements, right? Do we get that concept?
Well, answer. You gave the answer.
Sit down. There you go. There's the pass. So here's the thing. How many of us agree that the government should spend less? Right? How many of us think that the government should spend less on subsidies? Right? Or entitlements specifically. Like, okay, here, I would hope everybody would have their hand up right now. Entitlement spending is really out of control. Okay? So is defense spending, so is a lot of different types of spending. Well, this is my own personal sort of ideology. So maybe you don't believe that. I don't care if you don't have your hand up. I'll forgive you for it. Here's the problem, right? Most Americans actually do complain about subsidies because we complain about spending, we complain about handouts from the government, we don't really want it. The problem is the vast majority of Americans actually get some sort of subsidy. And when Americans want the government to decrease spending, it's never their subsidy that they want taken, it's always somebody else's. Right? So I asked a kid in one of my classes yesterday about this, about the spending and whether or not this sort of stuff needs to decrease, and he was like, "Oh, absolutely, it should." And I said, "So when you grow up and you have a child, you're going to go ahead and look at the government and be like, 'No, I don't want that $1,800 tax credit.'" And he went, "No, I'm going to take that." Yeah. Right? We complain about it, but we also still take it. Right? Which makes it really difficult to eliminate any of this stuff once it happens. And that shouldn't surprise anybody, right? I mean, look, Obamacare is essentially an entitlement. Okay? And Obamacare, we talked about, was wildly unpopular when it's passed. And now, like 6 terrible years later, nobody wants to get rid of it. All right? We don't want to give up our subsidies. Okay? Other reasons that subsidies are sort of difficult to give up, or get rid of in terms of government. A lot of the times we are unaware of various subsidies. We're unaware of how much they affect the budget or where the money is actually going. We don't pay attention to it because it doesn't really affect us, right? And we can go back and look at farm subsidies as an example of that. And so we remember that whole conversation about how the government pays people to not grow food. Ashton, you look confused. Did you know that? Were you out that day?
I think I was something like that.
Okay. So if you weren't here, real quick overview. The United States government pays farmers to not grow food, right? Literally pays people to not work. Because if every farmer grew as much food as they could, you would flood the market with an overproduction of food, which would drive prices way down, which would then cause farmers to end up losing money. That's bad, we don't want that, so we subsidize to make sure that some people don't grow food, and then the price of crops is artificially inflated, right? Now, how much money do we give to farmers annually to not work? No one knows. Of course you don't know. I don't expect you to know. I don't know. Right? But this is one of these subsidies that... Let me sit there, alright, well, I don't really understand it. I don't really know. Is it really that big of a deal? Right? I mean, I sit there and explain it to you, and I'm like, you know, if we didn't do this, you'd have overproduction. The prices of food would drop. And then your first reaction is like, oh, that'd be great. Why do we do this? I want for lower price food. And then I go a little bit further and explain to you that then all farmers would go out of business and we would have no food. And you're like, ooh, I like eating. I don't want to have no food. So you're like, okay, I guess it makes sense. We'll allow it. But then that's it. And that's the best understanding of farm subsidies you're probably going to get. Okay, so we don't really get rid of them because we don't know about them. And then they do promote commerce, right? And again, this is a good example of it, right? So by providing farm subsidies to farmers, we are promoting a better marketplace really for all of us. All right? Other types of government subsidies that we can look at or that we can view, government will actually provide various industries with just money as a general rule, for a variety of reasons. All right. Again, don't worry too much about that. A lot of it is stuff that we don't understand. Some of that is charges of corporate welfare. That should be a little bit more common and understanding for you today. Hopefully you realize that at the end of the Bush administration and at the beginning of the Obama administration, we bailed out with significant amounts of money, like hundreds of billions of dollars, both the auto industry as well as the banking industry in the United States. Okay? These were subsidies that were provided to industries because said industries were poorly run and they were going to go under. That's corporate welfare. Which is a terrible violation of free market capitalism, but people have their reasons for it. And I will let's go ahead and talk about this for a second. Who bailed out the banks? What president?
Talking about Wall Street?
Yeah,
Oh no, that was Obama.
it was Obama, right?
Yeah.
Who bailed out the auto industry?
Obama.
Bush. And this is one of these things that I try to explain to children. Obama and Bush should have been just night and day ideologically different. Yet when you look at some of their behaviors and policies as President of the United States, eerily similar. Right? Which is why I pretty much hate Republicans and Democrats. Now we get to the good stuff in terms of subsidies, or the terrible stuff, the stuff that you're angry about. Welfare subsidies, right, Zane? Terrible. They're okay if they're temporary though, right? Just can't be permanent.
Right. If we eliminated most of the waste, fraud, and abuse of all these entitlement programs, we would reduce spending tremendously. That's the
When
thing.
did Donald Trump walk in the room?
Well, I mean, it's true.
Waste, fraud, and that's the exact order that he used those terms in as well.
Well, those are the things that
Occur.
should be eliminated to save money, because the entitlement, you're never going to get rid of an entitlement. Once you have an entitlement, it's virtually impossible to get rid of. So if
He
you,
was paying attention, that's true. I just told him that, and he knows it.
well, that's, I mean.
No, I know, you probably knew that before I said it.
mean, if we went and interviewed people off the street, I mean, even some dumb people might be able to tell you that. So, maybe not, I don't know, I give people too much credit, but that those waste, fraud, and abuse, if you took those things out of entitlement, because there's so much of it, then the government might actually save some money, but they'd probably find a way to spend it somewhere else.
Oh, certainly. Oh, absolutely. They would save money, that's an accurate statement. But they would, I can guarantee you they would find somewhere else to spend. Right? The first one that you need to understand is Social Security. Okay? Social Security is obviously for the elderly. It is basically a government-sponsored retirement program. Now, I do want you to understand though, because a lot of people actually don't get this. We all understand that, like, when you get your AARP card, like, you start counting down the years until you get Social Security. There are actually other people that get Social Security as well. Okay? So survivors of people who had Social Security can obtain it, as well as individuals that are disabled. My sister-in-law was actually able to obtain Social Security for like 7 or 8 years while she was in her 20s. Right? As a result of social welfare programs that were aimed at helping her, because at that point she was a single mother. Right? Because she was a survivor. It wasn't not the same as certain other situations. Okay? But these are benefits for which there's no means test. Right? So she could have been making $100,000 a year at that point, and she was still eligible. She was not, but she would have been eligible at that point as well. Right? This is something that you need to understand, because a means test is significant, especially when it comes to sort of social welfare type subsidies or benefits or payments or things like that. A means test means, do you qualify for it in some manner or form? Right? Do you have to do something? Do you have to prove that you need it in order to have the benefit? And a lot of these there are no means tests for, right? Social Security, no means test. Medicare, no means test. This just goes to the elderly. If you ever can't remember, the easiest way that I personally found to remember the difference between Medicare and Medicaid Old people need care because they're constantly sick. Poor people need aid because they're poor. Right? See the difference? At least that's what works for me. Right? Unemployment insurance, again, no real means test. If you've lost your job, you can get a temporary unemployment. And then temporary assistance to needy families. This is what most people refer to. This is like the actual name of what most people call welfare. Do we understand that concept? Hopefully you actually understand from a governmental sense. Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, these are all welfare programs. Social Security being the largest welfare program, right? Temporary assistance to needy families, that's like free money to poor families that you and like the government would typically think of as welfare. All right? Supplemental security income, these goes to the disabled people. Again, there's a means test for this because you have to prove that you're disabled. Food stamps are a means test. Medicaid has a means test. These are things that require that you actually prove that you need them. All right? Now, when it comes to welfare politics, there are basically two kinds of policies. Majoritarian policies, everybody pays, everybody benefits. We remember that concept? Right? So majoritarian, everybody pays, everybody benefits. What's your best example of this? Social Security, right? You will find when you get your first real job, if you have not had one already, that you get Social Security taken out of your check, and it is a significant amount of money, right? Like a depressingly significant amount of money, all right? And this exists because when you turn, well, by the time you guys get there, like 89, you will be able to withdraw Social Security benefits. I joke. It'll probably be bankrupt before you're able to get it. I have not, that might not be true too. There would be ways to save it. It's just a matter of whether or not people can do it. All right. And then there are client policies where few people benefit and everybody pays, and this is what you would think of as actual like welfare, right? Like so the temporary assistance for needy families. Everybody pays into that because that's where it comes from tax money and everybody pays taxes, right? All right, now, Social Security becomes the most prominent because Social Security is actually, one, it's majoritarian, so it actually affects everybody, but two, it's laying on its deathbed currently, right? Which means that there's going to have to be some sort of, some sort of reaction, response, new policy implementation. Something has to happen, or Social Security will die a very, very ugly, painful death. All right? The first problem with Social Security is we have some demographic problems. We've had a declining birth rate in the United States. We've had increasing life expectancy. And what this means is that we've had fewer children being born in recent years, and people are living longer and longer and longer. So, when Social Security was originally created, basically the idea behind it was this, is that young, healthy, working class people like myself would pay into Social Security, and then that money would actually go to the people who were withdrawing Social Security at the time, all right? Because when we created this, we basically just created it at like day one, and people who had never really paid into it were able to get money out of it, all right? This is a result of the Great Depression, all right? So, it's created the following, so these two things right here really created the following statistic, right? When this started, you got 16 working people for every recipient, right? Now we've got 3 working people for every Social Security recipient. By 2020, it was projected, and these are old statistics now, right? So, but it's going to go down to 2 working people for a recipient. After 2020, it's going to get even worse because my parents' generation, they are beginning to retire now, and that's the baby boomers, which make up a vastly significant portion of the population coming out of World War II, all right? That causes the surplus in the trust fund to decline to the point where it's actually going to no longer exist, period. I mean, if they don't fix it, they don't do something about it, and the trust goes away. Once the trust goes away, then you really have only income versus expenditures, and as income decreases and expenditures increase because you have smaller working class populations and more retirees pulling benefits, right, that leads to significant problems. One of the ways around this is that we've raised the age of eligibility over time. That's why I made the joke a minute ago that you'll be 89 before you can get it. Then there are also other sort of things that we've done, right? So we've reduced the COLA, which is the cost of living adjustment. That basically is supposed to take into account inflation and other things of that nature. By reducing what that is, Social Security becomes less and less beneficial over time. In all honesty, if they really adopt a means test, and I hope they don't fully adopt a means test, it's actually highly detrimental to people that are smart and actually paid for their own retirement or accounted for their own retirement in some manner, right? Because now you're penalizing somebody who didn't waste all their money when they were in their youth or their 30s or 40s.
Well, but if they did their own retirement fund, then why would they need Social Security as much?
Because I want to live even better in retirement.
Well, I know.
Well, I mean, no. But here's the thing, because I can tell you. I mean, look, I'm obviously I'm not an old man, right? Just trust me on that. I know some of you are like, yes, you are. No, hey, I'm still in my 30s. I'm not that old, right? My wife is still in her 20s. Okay. Don't look at me like that. She's barely in her 20s. She's still in her 20s, and we are both putting money away toward retirement. Okay? That doesn't mean that when I hit like 75 and I actually retire, that I'm all of a sudden going to look at the government and be like, no, keep my Social Security money. I don't want it. Yes, I want it.
Well, I mean, but
Because it's still additional income that I can use to live the life that I want to live. Yes, ma'am.
If you had to pay, like, throughout, like, getting, like, the taxes from your, like...
Seriously, I paid into it. I want my money back. Right? But you can't, and here's the thing is if you did this, then it's really not fair to me if you look at me and you go, oh, hey, because you're smart, because you weren't a moron in your 30s and 40s and you actually saved for your own retirement, we're not going to give you all that money we stole from you. Why is that fair to you? Right? Now, some of the ways that you could actually go about trying to fix this, that's actually not right anymore. It's now $100,000. And this actually might make sense to what your sort of idea here is, right? So if you make $1 million, you actually don't pay Social Security tax on the entire million. You only pay it on like the first 100,000. Because theoretically, if you're making that much more, you should have all kinds of, like you should be able to save for your own retirement. They can increase that to help increase the supply that's coming in. There are people that want to have it privatized. I'm going to tell you that's a slippery slope right there, because then you're going to have dumb Americans, because there's a lot of dumb Americans that are just going to waste their own Social Security retirement, and then they're going to ask the government for more money, because that's what they did. All right? We're out of time, so we'll go ahead and stop. I wanted to get through the rest of that, but at least that goes through the idea of Social Security.